I want to start with overpayments because what I've learned from you is there's a connection between the two, and one can lead to the other. So let's start with what an overpayment is, like the basics.
First of all, the letter people get when they're overpaid is frightening. It says, we've reviewed your case, you've been overpaid. I've had them as much as $280,000,
Whoa.
and please send us a check within 30 days. They might as well say you owe us $10 million for that 30-day check. They can come from a lot of reasons. The continuing disability reviews, if you appeal and lose, you owe the money you got while you were appealing. If you're getting workers' compensation, the most you can get between workers' comp and Social Security disability is 80% of your best year's earnings. There's other nuances to that, but that's the basic to start with. Social Security sends a letter every year or 2 years asking questions about your condition. One of the questions always is, are you receiving workers' comp? If you check yes, you're without fault. That makes getting the overpayment waived easier. If you check no or leave it blank, you're at fault and you have almost no chance of getting rid of that overpayment. If you've been working and not telling Social Security, you again, when you signed up for Social Security, one of the things you agreed was to tell them every time you've worked. Mm-hmm. If you don't tell them and your work is over the substantial gainful employment limit, which this year is $1,470, last year it was $1,350, you can have an overpayment declared. We'll discuss trial work periods later on. If you're getting SSI, you're allowed that monthly income. If you work while getting SSI, even if it's below the substantial gainful employment limit, you're supposed to report it because your SSI will be reduced. If you're getting disabled adult child benefits, meaning you were disabled before age 22, and you're getting benefits based on your parents' earnings, and you get married, you're no longer entitled to disabled adult child benefits. If you don't tell them, you lose your benefits. You have an overpayment. If you're getting SSI and you inherit money, or if there's a trust in your name, you have to report it. You have to be upfront about it. Those are the main reasons people have overpayments.
Mm-hmm. All right. So I just want to unpack this a little bit. Let's take a Social Security disability recipient, which is the majority of our audience out there. Am I correct in understanding that workers' compensation and earning over the SGA are the two primary triggers for overpayments?
Working is right up there with it.
Okay.
It's a close third.
All right. So what would you say the 1 and 2 reasons are for overpayments for a Social Security disability recipient?
Okay, let's start with the workers' comp.
Okay.
You can put on your application that you're receiving workers' comp.
All right.
Before they start your initial payment, they're supposed to find out how much work comp you're receiving.
Right.
They do that about half of the time. The other half of the time, they pay you your full benefit. And years later, I have people who were postal workers, air traffic controllers, who get the notice of the overpayment 20 years after they got Social Security disability. An overpayment notice of $150,000 to $200,000 because they may have had dependent children also.
Okay.
As long as they check, yes, I'm receiving workers' comp, we can almost always get rid of that overpayment notice. Working, one of the disasters, and I often can't help somebody, is the person who every month earns right up to the substantial gainful employment limit.
Mm-hmm.
This year, they were earning $1,469 a month. Last year, they earned $1,349. In 21, they earned $1,309. And they stop earning at that point every month so they don't lose their disability.
Mm-hmm.
Red flag for Social Security.
Totally.
Yeah. Social Security is going to say, why didn't you earn $2 a month more? And the answer is usually because I didn't want to lose my disability.
Right.
So they're almost always going to get cut off, and often with some notice that they should have been cut off 2 years earlier.
Mm-hmm.
We can usually get that backdated termination revoked because you can't cut somebody off retroactively.
Mm-hmm.
Other than earnings, they had no proof.
Mm-hmm.
The only proof they have is if somebody said, well, sure, I could have worked a lot more 2 years ago, but I didn't.
Right.
Then they're just sticking it to themselves. I tell people, when you get disability, if you're going to work, try and keep it at least $200 below the Social Security limit.
Mm-hmm.
I also tell them, and I send a notebook to my clients with these instructions. People who weren't my clients, I say, buy a notebook, keep a diary, and write down every date that you have a medical appointment, whether it's with a doctor, a dentist, a physical therapist, whatever you're doing, put it in that notebook. Every time your medicine changes, write it down. I got switched from this medicine to that medicine on this date. Every time you have a bad day, write a detail about, I woke up and I could barely get out of bed. I hurt so bad. My anxiety was so terrible, I couldn't talk to anybody. Write a paragraph about that bad day. The people who do the reviews for the continuing disability reviews are evaluated on the amount of cases they handle, not the quality of the work they do. If you give them 50 to 100 handwritten pages when they're reviewing you, they're not going to review it. They don't have time to read all of that. So they go on to the person who just has a couple check boxes on the form. Give them a lot, and you're less likely to get reviewed. If you try and go back and say, here's the dates I went to the doctor, you're not as good. If you keep this diary, and when they review you, you bring it to the Social Security office and say, copy this, you're less likely to get reviewed and terminated.
Interesting. So it's kind of like, I'm thinking about, it's kind of like a war. You want to inundate them, right?
Well, lawyers talk about the weight of the evidence, which means how much evidence you have. I think of it as how many pounds of paper you're giving them that makes them not want to look at it.
Yeah. Yeah. Plus it shows that you're making a concentrated effort to document your treatment and do that. So for CDRs, I know we've got, for all of you out there, we've got a complete 10-step course that we did with Jim. So we're just going to touch on some of the key tips with the CDR piece. But that definitely is one of them. So as we kind of circle back to the work comp, the way to avoid that is to make sure you check the right box. That's as simple as it is, or what?
Let's go back to the application. If you're getting work comp when you apply, make sure you check that you are.
Yep.
Some people don't.
Mm-hmm.
Secondly, when you get those review letters, check that you're getting workers' comp. That you have to get rid of an overpayment. You have to first prove that you're without fault. If you don't say you were getting it, it's your fault. If you say you're getting it, Social Security may take years to look at it, but that's not your fault. And then we prove the hardship. Not many people getting disability can repay $10,000, $15,000, $30,000. So the hardship is easy to prove.
Mm-hmm. Jim, a question: if somebody gets a continuing disability review today, and they're no longer receiving, they received a lump sum work comp settlement, let's say 5 years ago for $50,000. So how would they check the box? Because they're technically not receiving it. They have received it, but they're not receiving it now. What advice do you have?
They can check, no, I'm not, because they're not receiving it. One of the bigger problems is when you received it. If you were getting Social Security when you received it, Social Security should have been notified.
Mm-hmm.
What I get workers' comp lawyers calling me all the time when they settle cases to make sure their verbiage in the settlement is correct. If you write a paragraph that says this settlement is prorated over my client's life expectancy of 180 months or whatever it's going to be, and the federal government has a life expectancy on every person at every age, that's the number you use.
Mm-hmm.
You may have gotten $200,000 when you were 50 years old, but Social Security looks at that as about $5,000 a year, and there's going to be no offset on your Social Security then. If they don't put that in, Social Security looks at that as if you're getting your temporary total rate until that amount's used up, which is going to wipe out your Social Security for a long time.
I've seen it for people that don't know that. They call that the Hartman formula, I recall, right?
I'm an expert witness on a malpractice case now where the lawyer didn't include that verbiage in a $700,000 settlement on a claimant who was about 40 years old, and it's costing him about $1,000 a month.
Yeah.
For most of the period, he's going to get Social Security disability.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think the big picture here for people is just you need to understand the process when you're going through it so that you don't get caught in one of these situations. Now, there's one area where we may have a slight difference of opinion or approach on this, and I want to clear that up. And that has to do with working. So in the work that we do here, the advice that I give people, Jim, is to stay below the amount that will trigger a trial work month, which this year is $1,050. Right, Jam?
Correct.
Yeah.
Oh, Jam. Okay.
Jam, yeah. So if they stay below that amount, or ideally with your advice, if you stay 20% below
it's
that.
$1,450 is the trial work period this year.
But if you're over $1,050, you will start to get into one of your 9 months, any months according to the
Correct.
regulation, right? So, so if somebody is in the $800 range, they're super safe.
Correct.
Okay. So, that is one thing. Are we missing anything on the connection between like what can create an overpayment? Is there any other variables here other than the two common ones and the other ones we discussed?
Well, we should talk about trial work period too.
Okay.
Because you can earn over that amount for 9 months.
Right.
If you do it for 10 months, you're over the limit. I had somebody who went about $20 over for 11 months. Mm-hmm. And it set up the trigger. We were able, by proving his disability was still ongoing, and he didn't do it again to keep him on disability, but it was torturous for him to do that. The 9-month period, trial work period, is what they call a rolling 9 months. So it's 9 months out of 60 months. Mm-hmm. So if you made more than the substantial gainful employment or the trial work period amount in 2017, that's dropped off. And you have more months now if you're still getting disability. So they have a 60-month look back to see if you made over that amount in the past 60 months. It used to be 9 months in a lifetime, and now it's 9 out of 60. We've proposed allowing earning more and reducing disability payments to encourage people to go back to work, but they haven't gotten there yet.
Yeah, that's a nice idea, actually. Yeah. Jim, do you have in the work that you've done, do you have like some standout examples that perhaps sharing with the audience would be good a learning opportunity for them, people that maybe have lost their benefits, they shouldn't have, you were able to get them back?
Well, the person getting SSI and had that trust, we kept his benefits. I had a client on a CDR who had a kidney transplant. If you have transplants, they assume within 12 to 18 months you're going to be better.
Mm-hmm.
They don't look at anything. So he got his termination notice. He had uncontrolled diabetes. He didn't have a primary care doc. He only had an endocrinologist. So the person at DDS who was evaluating him said, well, if he doesn't have a primary care doc, he must not be disabled.
Mm-hmm.
And they terminated him.
Mm-hmm.
They were creating an overpayment. That's when he retained me. I told him to get a primary care doc. The primary care doc basically examined him, said, we're going to have you keep doing what the endocrinologist says. And eventually we went to a hearing where the judge thought it was ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
Part of the thing is Social Security wants you to give up. If they send you that letter that you've been terminated, they think, some of the people there think, well, nobody really should get disability that long. So if you get this letter, you'll go back to work.
Yeah.
It's not that simple.
Mm-hmm.
I've had a lot of cases where people have gotten their workers' comp, then they get Social Security disability, and 10, 12 years later, they get this crazy overpayment letter. We first of all prove it wasn't their fault by getting the actual notices and showing that they checked, yes, I'm getting workers' comp. Then we have to prove the hardship part. An air traffic controller on workers' comp is getting about $100,000 a year in workers' comp. Some people think that's impossible to prove hardship. But if they have a nice mortgage, if they have car payments, who knows what medical bills aren't covered by insurance. And we can prove the hardship part based on the standard of living they have from what they assume their income was going to be. It's usually feasible to get the overpayment waived by showing that these claimants never expected to lose their money. The benefits go down in the future when the offset is recalculated, but the overpayment is waived. I've had people who come to me who have worked right up to the SGA limit for years and years, and then they get this notice that they're being terminated and overpaid, and they appeal. I can't help them. If every year their monthly income is exactly what the limit is to avoid a trial work period, they're going to lose. They can't possibly say, I could earn up to that exact amount. And when the rate went up, I was able to earn $50 or $100 a month more because I got a little bit better. They're just going to lose, and I can't help them.
Yeah. Yeah. I learned something here. I want to make sure I get it, though, before I say I learned the right thing. Is proving hardship is not a baseline dollar amount. Proving hardship is relative to the lifestyle and the expenses.
Completely. Right? I had a client who got a $70,000 overpayment.
Mm-hmm.
Proving it was Social Security's fault was easy. When they granted him benefits, somebody made a typo and started his benefits 2 years before he became disabled. He had leukemia. He couldn't get authorization for a marrow transplant. So he took his entire savings, and his father chipped in money and paid for the $250,000. He had nothing left, although his wife was working. that was basically contributing to the family support.
Yeah.
Social Security agreed that he was without fault. He didn't know that they made a mistake when he got his past due benefit. And it was a hardship to pay it back because he'd used all his money for his medical bills. Eventually, with some appeals, the insurance reimbursed him, but that was well after Social Security waived the overpayment.
Interesting.
Yet, if you can get past the fault part, the hardship can be done. You have to dig deeply.
Good point.